I'm Ivy Monroe, 27. Until last month, I believed family meant having each other's backs. Then my grandmother's funeral changed everything. While I stood there grieving the woman who raised me, my mother pulled me aside with news that shattered my world. "Grandma left everything to Chloe," she said quietly. "The house, the money, the jewelry. She thought Chloe needed it more." My sister's words still echo in my mind. "Don't be dramatic, Ivy. You've always been the strong one." What they didn't know was that I'd been sending Grandma money every month for 2 years to help with her medications. What they couldn't see was that I'd been building something they never expected. But here's what makes this story unbelievable. Why did they call me for help just 30 days later? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The day I found Grandma Sylvia's recipe box, I was 8 years old and hiding in her kitchen pantry after my parents' latest screaming match. She discovered me there, knees pulled to my chest, trying to make myself invisible among the flour sacks and canned peaches. "Come here, little bird," she said, her voice gentle but firm in that way that made me feel safe. She pulled the wooden box from the highest shelf and set it on her kitchen table. "Let me show you something that matters." Inside weren't just recipes. There were handwritten notes tucked between index cards spotted with vanilla extract and flour fingerprints. Notes that said things like, "Ivy helped me make this today. She's got natural instincts in the kitchen," and made Ivy's favorite cookies when she was feeling sad about the divorce. Every recipe seemed to have a memory of me attached to it. "Why? Do you write about me?" I asked, running my small fingers over her careful cursive. "Because someday, when I'm not here anymore, I want you to remember that you were seen, that you mattered, that someone noticed how hard you tried to take care of everyone, even when you were still just a little girl." I didn't understand then what she meant about taking care of everyone. I thought that's what kids were supposed to do. Make sure Mom didn't cry too much, help Chloe with her homework when she got frustrated, keep the house quiet when Dad came home angry. It seemed normal to me that at 8, I was already making my own lunches and remembering to pay the pizza delivery guy when my parents forgot they'd ordered dinner. Grandma saw it differently. She saw a child who'd been forced to grow up too, fast, who'd learned that love was something you earned through usefulness rather than something you received simply for existing. After my parents' divorce was finalized, Grandma became our anchor. Mom would drop Chloe and me off at her house every day after school, and we'd stay until dinner, sometimes longer. Sometimes we'd spend entire weekends there when Mom needed space to figure things out. Those were the golden years. Grandma's house smelled like vanilla and lemon oil. She had rules. Homework before television, chores before play, honesty before everything. But she also had patience, which was something in short supply at home. When Chloe struggled with math, Grandma would sit with her for hours, breaking down problems into smaller pieces. When I worried about Mom's crying spells, Grandma would listen to my concerns like I was an adult whose opinions mattered. "You're different, girls," she'd tell us during those afternoons when Chloe and I would inevitably compare ourselves to each other. "Chloe feels everything big and bright, like fireworks. Ivy thinks everything through careful and deep, like still water. Both are beautiful. Both are necessary." I believed her then. I believed that our differences were complementary, that Chloe's emotional intensity and my practical steadiness made us a good team. I believed we were both loved equally, just differently. But looking back now, I can see the patterns that were already forming. When Chloe broke something, Grandma would comfort her and help her clean it up. When I broke something, Grandma would hand me the dustpan and say, "You know how to fix this." When Chloe cried about a friend being mean, Grandma would hold her and make hot chocolate. When I mentioned being lonely, Grandma would suggest I read a book or work on a project. The message was clear, even if it wasn't intentional. Chloe needed protecting. Ivy could handle herself. By the time I turned 18, this dynamic was so established that no one questioned it anymore. When I got into college on partial scholarship, the family celebration lasted exactly one dinner, when Chloe barely graduated high school. There were months of strategizing about her future, family meetings about what we could do to help her find her path. I moved out for college with 2 suitcases and a promise to call every Sunday. Chloe stayed home for 2 years, working part-time jobs she quit when they became too stressful, dating guys who broke her heart regularly, and generally trying to figure out who she was. During those college years, I started my freelance design business almost by accident. My roommate needed a logo for her campus organization, and I made one for her on my laptop during a particularly boring statistics lecture. She loved it. Her friends loved it. Before I knew it, I was getting paid to design flyers, logos, wedding invitations, and small business websites. I never mentioned the business to my family. It seemed too small, too uncertain to deserve their attention. Instead, I focused on my communications degree and my part-time job at the campus coffee shop. Safe, expected, practical choices that nobody could question. After graduation, I moved back to town and got a job at Brew & Bean, the local cafe that had been a fixture downtown since before I was born. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady income while I built my design business on the side. I rented a small apartment above the used bookstore, furnished it with thrift store finds and plants I propagated from cuttings, and created a life that was entirely mine. My family saw the cafe job. They didn't see the late nights I spent designing brand identities for small businesses, the weekends I spent photographing products for e-commerce sites, or the slowly growing bank account that represented something I'd never had before. Financial independence. Ivy's always been practical, Mom would say when people asked about my post-college life. She's not as ambitious as some kids, but she's dependable. Practical. Dependable. Code words for doesn't require much attention. Meanwhile, Chloe was cycling through careers like outfits. First it was nursing school, then cosmetology, then a brief stint at community college studying business. Each transition came with family support, financial help, and endless discussions about finding her passion. I didn't resent it exactly. I'd learned early that wanting attention was a sign of neediness, and neediness was something Ivy Monroe didn't do. I was proud of my independence, proud that I could handle my own problems, proud that my family never had to worry about me. Eli saw through this facade immediately. I met him at a networking event for small business owners, where I was the youngest person by at least 10 years and clearly the most nervous. He was standing by the coffee table, looking equally out of place in his carefully ironed shirt and tie that didn't quite match. "First time?" he asked, nodding toward my death grip on my business cards. "That obvious?" The deer-in-headlights look gave it away. I'm Eli. I run a small marketing consultancy, which is a fancy way of saying I help people figure out how to sell things online. We ended up talking for the entire event, sharing war stories about difficult clients and the peculiar loneliness of working for yourself. He was funny in a dry, observational way that made me actually laugh instead of just politely smile. When he suggested we grab coffee the following week to talk business, I said yes before I could overthink it. That coffee meeting turned into a standing weekly appointment. Business talk gradually gave way to real conversation. Eli was the first person who seemed genuinely interested in what I was building, who asked follow-up questions about my projects and remembered details from previous conversations. "Your family doesn't know about the business?" he asked one afternoon, after I'd mentioned landing a particularly good client. "They know. I do design work on the side. They just don't know how much it's grown." "Why not?" It was a simple question that I couldn't answer simply. Because they'd never asked? Because they wouldn't understand? Because I liked having something that was entirely mine? Because they see me as the responsible one, I finally said. If they knew I was taking risks, starting a business, they might start worrying about me. And I'm not supposed to be someone people worry about. Eli studied me for a long moment. "That sounds exhausting," It was exhausting. But it was also all I knew. 3 years passed like this. My business grew steadily while my family continued to see me as stable, predictable Ivy who worked at a coffee shop and lived quietly in her little apartment. I celebrated my small victories alone or with Eli. I handled my setbacks the same way. When Grandma started having health problems, I was the one who noticed first. During our weekly phone calls, I picked up on the subtle changes. She was repeating stories, forgetting appointments, struggling with tasks that used to be second nature. I started visiting more often, bringing groceries, helping with bills, and eventually arranging for a home health aide. When the aide mentioned that Grandma's medications were expensive, and she sometimes skipped doses to save money, I started contributing without being asked, $200 a month. Not enough to strain my growing business income, but enough to ensure Grandma could take her heart medication consistently. I never mentioned it to Mom or Chloe. It felt private, like something between Grandma and me. "You're a good girl, Ivy," Grandma would say when I'd visit, and I'd feel that familiar warmth of being seen, of mattering. I thought that warmth would last forever. I thought Grandma saw me clearly, understood my worth, appreciated who I'd become. I was wrong. The funeral was on a Tuesday in October. The leaves were just starting to turn, and there was that crisp promise of winter in the air that always made me think of Grandma's house. She died peacefully in her sleep, the way she'd wanted. But peaceful or not, death leaves a particular kind of silence in its wake. I spoke at the service. Mom had asked me to, saying I was better with words than Chloe. I talked about Grandma's wisdom, her strength, her ability to make anyone feel at home in her kitchen. I talked about the recipe box and the careful notes she'd kept, about how she'd taught me that love was in the details, in the attention you paid to small things. After the service, after the burial, after the endless parade of casseroles and condolences, Mom pulled me aside. "We need to talk about the will," she said. I'd assumed there would be some discussion, some family meeting to divide Grandma's belongings. She hadn't been wealthy, but she'd owned her house and had some savings. I figured we'd share it. Maybe keep some meaningful pieces of jewelry or furniture. "Grandma left everything to Chloe," Mom said, the words coming out in a rush like she wanted to get them over with. The house, the savings account, the jewelry, all of it. The world tilted slightly. All of it. She felt Chloe needed it more. You know how Chloe struggles, and you've always been so capable, so independent. Grandma thought this would give Chloe the stability she needs to really get her life on track. I stared at my mother, trying to process what she was saying. She left me nothing. She left you her recipe box. And some books. She knew you'd want those. The recipe box. The thing that had made me feel special at 8 years old was apparently the full measure of my worth at 27. "I see," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "Don't be dramatic about this, Ivy," Chloe said, appearing at my shoulder. "You've always been the strong one. You don't need help like I do. Strong, practical, dependable, independent, all." The words I'd worn like badges of honor suddenly felt like chains. I drove home to my apartment in a daze, carrying the recipe box and a small stack of Grandma's gardening books. I set them on my kitchen counter and stared at them for a long time, trying to understand how a lifetime of love and connection had been condensed into these few items. That night, I opened the recipe box for the first time since I was 8. The notes were still there, still in Grandma's careful handwriting, but now they read differently. Now they felt like evidence of a relationship that apparently hadn't mattered enough to acknowledge in her final decisions. I was surprised by how much it hurt. I'd thought I was past needing external validation, past caring what my family thought of my worth. But sitting alone in my apartment with a recipe box and a crushing sense of being unseen, I realized I'd been lying to myself. Mattered. I deserved to matter, and someday, They were going to realize that too. Exactly 31 days after Grandma's funeral, my phone rang at 6:47 a.m. I was in my apartment, halfway through my morning routine of coffee and checking emails before my shift at Brew and Bean. The caller ID showed Mom, and my first thought was that something terrible had happened. Mom never called before 9 a.m. unless there was an emergency. Ivy? Her voice was strained, tired in a way that made her sound older than her 51 years. Are you awake? I am now. What's wrong? It's Chloe. She's in trouble, honey. Real trouble this time. I set down my coffee mug, suddenly alert. Despite everything that had happened with the inheritance, Chloe was still my sister. If she was hurt, if she needed help. What kind of trouble? Financial trouble. She's about to lose the house. Grandma's house. The house that was supposed to give Chloe the stability she needed. The house that had been worth more than enough to secure anyone's future, even someone as financially chaotic as my sister. How is that possible? The funeral was a month ago. Mom's sigh was long and heavy. Ryan came back. Of course. Ryan Keller, Chloe's ex-fiancé who had disappeared 3 weeks before their wedding 6 months ago, taking with him not just Chloe's heart, but also the money she'd saved for their deposit on a condo. Ryan, who was charming and handsome and absolutely terrible with money. And he convinced her to invest in some business opportunity, some cryptocurrency thing. Said it was a sure thing, that they could triple the inheritance and have enough to buy their dream house and plan the wedding she'd always wanted. The coffee in my stomach turned acidic. How much? All of it, Ivy. The savings, the jewelry she sold, everything. She even took out a second mortgage on the house based on its value. I sat down hard on my kitchen chair, staring at the recipe box that still sat on my counter where I'd left it a month ago. All of it? The cryptocurrency company disappeared overnight. Ryan's gone again. And the mortgage payments. Mom's voice broke. The first payment is due in 2 weeks and Chloe doesn't have it. The bank is already talking about foreclosure. Where is she now? She's here with me. She's been crying for 3 days straight. She won't eat, won't shower, won't even get out of bed. I'm really worried about her, Ivy. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of family responsibility settling on my shoulders. Despite the hurt, despite the anger I'd been carrying for a month, the thought of Chloe genuinely suffering made my chest tight. What does she need? The mortgage payment is $3,800. If she can make that, she'll have time to figure out next steps. Maybe sell the house in a more organized way. Maybe find a job that actually pays enough to keep it. $3,800. It wasn't an impossible amount, but it wasn't small either. For most people, it would require serious planning, maybe borrowing against a credit card or asking for help from family. For me, it was doable. My design business had been growing faster than I'd told anyone. I had that much in my business savings account. Money I'd been setting aside for equipment upgrades and maybe eventually hiring a part-time assistant. I can help with the payment, I heard myself saying. But I need to talk to Chloe first. Oh, honey, thank you. I knew we could count on you. You've always been our problem solver. Our problem solver. Not the person they thought to include in family decisions, but the person they called when those decisions went wrong. Can you bring her over tonight? Around 7? Of course. And Ivy? Don't be too hard on her. She knows she made a mistake. She's learned her lesson. After Mom hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment for a long time, thinking about lessons and mistakes and the difference between the two. A mistake was spilling coffee on your shirt. A mistake was forgetting someone's birthday, or accidentally double booking yourself for lunch dates, gambling away an entire inheritance on a get-rich-quick scheme with the ex-fiancé who'd already stolen from you once. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. A series of choices, each one prioritizing immediate gratification over long-term stability. But it was also a very Chloe thing to do. I called in sick to work. something I'd done maybe 3 times in the past year, and spent the day thinking. I walked through downtown, past the small businesses I'd designed logos for, past the restaurant where I'd created their entire brand identity from scratch. I thought about the client who'd just hired me to redesign their website, paying me more for one project than I made in 2 months at the cafe. I thought about the money I'd been sending to Grandma, money that could have gone toward my own future, but that I'd given freely because I loved her and wanted her to be comfortable. I thought about 31 days, how quickly you could destroy something that had taken a lifetime to build. By the time Mom and Chloe arrived at my apartment that evening, I'd made my decision. But I needed to see my sister first, needed to understand what I was really dealing with. Chloe looked terrible. Her usually perfectly styled blonde hair was stringy and unwashed. She was wearing yoga pants and one of Mom's old sweaters, and her eyes were puffy and red-rimmed from crying. She looked like a ghost of herself. "Hey," she said softly, not quite meeting my eyes. "Hey." Mom filled the silence. "Should we sit down? Talk through the situation?" I made tea, more for something to do with my hands than because anyone wanted it. We sat around my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd built my business plan, where I'd celebrated landing my first big client, where I'd eaten countless quiet dinners alone. "Tell me what happened," I said to Chloe. She started crying immediately. "I'm so stupid, Ivy. I'm so fucking stupid." "You're not stupid, but I need to understand the timeline." Between sobs, the story came out. Ryan had contacted her 2 weeks after the funeral, full of apologies and explanations for his previous disappearance. He'd been dealing with family issues and working on himself and ready to be the man she deserved. "He seemed different," Chloe said, "more mature. He had this business opportunity, and he showed me all these documents, these projections. It looked so legitimate." "What kind of business opportunity?" "A new cryptocurrency exchange. He had a friend who was getting in on the ground floor, and they needed investors. The friend said we could triple our money in 3 months, maybe more." I bit back the first 5 responses that came to mind. "Did you research the company?" Ryan did. He showed me articles about crypto being the future, about people making millions, and I thought... She looked up at me with eyes that were still too trusting, even after everything. "I thought if I could turn the inheritance into something bigger, I could prove I deserved it. I could prove I wasn't just the screw-up sister who needed saving." There it was, the real reason behind the terrible decision. Chloe had felt the same weight of family expectations that I had, just from the opposite direction. She'd been cast as the one who needed help, and she'd wanted desperately to be the one who could stand on her own. The company disappeared? 3 days ago. The website went down, the phone numbers were disconnected, and Ryan... Her voice broke again. Ryan blocked my number and cleared out his apartment. "Have you filed a police report?" Mom jumped in. "We don't want to make this bigger than it needs to be. Ryan's probably long gone anyway, and Chloe just wants to move forward." I looked at my mother, really looked at her. She was still protecting Chloe from consequences, still trying to smooth over the rough edges instead of letting my sister learn from them. "Chloe," I said, "do you want to file a police report?" I don't know. I just want to fix this. I want to save the house and figure out how to move on." "The house is important to you?" "It's Grandma's house." She said it like that explained everything, and maybe it did. "It's the last piece of her we have. I can't be the one who loses it." I understood that feeling. The house was full of memories, full of the warmth and stability that had defined our childhood. Losing it would feel like losing Grandma all over again. But understanding something and enabling it were different things. "I can help with the mortgage payment," I said. "But I have conditions." Mom looked relieved. Chloe looked up at me with hope for the first time since she'd arrived. "What kind of conditions?" Mom asked. "First, Chloe files a police report about the fraud. Even if nothing comes of it, it goes on record. Ivy, Mom started. Second, Chloe gets a job. A real job with steady hours and a reliable paycheck. No more part-time retail that she quits when it gets stressful. That's fair, Chloe said quietly. Third, we sit down with a financial planner and figure out a realistic budget for keeping the house. If it's not sustainable, we discuss other options. Other options like what? Mom asked. Like selling it and using the proceeds to get Chloe into a smaller place she can actually afford. The silence that followed was heavy. The house was sacred ground in our family mythology, the place where Grandma had loved us and where we'd felt most like a real family. And fourth, I continued, no more financial decisions without running them past someone else first. Me, a financial advisor, someone who can be objective. Chloe nodded slowly. That's fair too. And one more thing. This is a loan, not a gift. We'll work out a payment plan that makes sense with your budget, but you will pay me back. Of course, Chloe said quickly. Of course I'll pay you back. I looked at my sister, trying to see past the tears and desperation to the person underneath. Was she capable of following through on these conditions? Was she ready to actually change? Or was this just another crisis that would pass once someone else fixed it for her? Okay, I said. I'll transfer the money tomorrow. Chloe burst into fresh tears, but these seemed different, relief instead of despair. She came around the table and hugged me, clinging like I was a life preserver. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. I'll do better, I promise. I'll figure this out. I hugged her back, feeling the familiar mix of love and frustration that had defined our relationship my entire life. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this crisis would be the turning point that helped her grow up, take responsibility, become the person I knew she could be. But I also knew that patterns were hard to break, that 31 days was nothing compared to 24 years of being rescued from her own choices. As I watched Mom and Chloe leave that night, I felt something shifting inside me. For the first time in my adult life, I'd set clear boundaries around helping my family. I'd asked for something in return instead of just giving freely. It felt strange, uncomfortable, but also strangely empowering. What I didn't know was that helping Chloe was about to reveal things about my family that would change everything I thought I understood about love, inheritance, and what it really meant to be seen. The real story was just beginning. The next morning, I transferred the money to Chloe's account and then did something I'd never done before. I called Eli and asked him to meet me for an emergency coffee session. Emergency coffee? He said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. That sounds serious. Family drama. The kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. I'll be there in 20 minutes. We met at our usual spot, a small cafe 2 blocks from my apartment that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Eli took one look at my face and ordered us both double shots. Okay, he said, settling into the worn leather chair across from me. Tell me everything. I told him about the phone call, about Chloe's financial disaster, about the conditions I'd set for helping. He listened without interrupting, occasionally raising an eyebrow, but never jumping in with advice or judgment. So, he said when I finished, how do you feel about it? Conflicted, angry, worried that I'm enabling her, worried that I'm being too harsh, worried that this is exactly what my family expects from me, to swoop in and fix things when their decisions go wrong. But you set boundaries this time. I did, and it felt weird. Good weird, maybe, but weird. Eli leaned forward, his expression serious. Can I ask you something? What would have happened if you'd said no? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. I never considered saying no. Why not? Because she's my sister. Because losing the house would destroy her. Because I trailed off, realizing I didn't have a good answer. Because you've been trained to believe that your worth comes from being useful to other people, Eli said gently. The words hit like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. My grandmother didn't think I was worth leaving anything to, I said, the admission coming out quieter than I'd intended. Apparently, being useful isn't the same as being valued. Or maybe, your grandmother saw something your family doesn't see yet. What do you mean? Maybe she knew that leaving everything to Chloe would eventually lead to this moment. Maybe she wanted to see what you'd do when you were finally forced to choose between being the family fixer and being your own person. I stared at him. That's a pretty elaborate theory. Your grandmother raised you, right? She knew you better than anyone. Don't you think it's possible she understood exactly what leaving you out of the will would do? The idea was unsettling. It suggested a level of manipulation that I didn't want to associate with Grandma, but it also suggested that maybe, somehow, she'd seen me more clearly than I'd realized. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Made the mortgage payment. Thank you again. Starting job applications today. I showed Eli the message. See? She's already following through. That's good. I hope it lasts. 2 weeks later, I was less optimistic. Chloe had filled out exactly 3 job applications, all for part-time retail positions that paid barely above minimum wage. When I suggested she look into office jobs or consider going back to school for a practical certification, she said she was exploring her options and didn't want to rush into anything. Meanwhile, she'd started posting on social media about her new chapter and learning to embrace change. The posts were accompanied by photos of expensive coffee drinks and shopping trips with friends. She bought a $300 purse yesterday, I told Eli during our weekly coffee meeting. Posted it on Instagram with some caption about investing in herself. Where is she getting money for $300 purses? Good question. I'm afraid to ask. The answer came the following day when Mom called. Ivy, sweetheart, could you maybe help Chloe with groceries this week? She's having a hard time adjusting to budgeting, and she's too proud to ask you directly. Mom, where did she get money for the purse she bought yesterday? A pause. What purse? The designer purse she posted on Instagram. $300. Oh, that. She said she found it at a consignment shop, much cheaper than retail. Even if that were true, which I doubted, it was still money she didn't have being spent on things she didn't need while asking family members to cover basic expenses. I'm not buying her groceries, Mom. That wasn't part of our agreement. But she's trying so hard, and you know how she gets when she's stressed. If she doesn't eat properly, she'll get sick, and then she'll learn to budget for food. The silence on the other end was heavy with disapproval. I don't understand this new attitude of yours, Ivy. Since when do we let family members struggle when we could easily help? Since they chose to gamble away their inheritance and then buy designer purses while asking for grocery money. That's not fair. She made one mistake. It wasn't one mistake, Mom. It was a series of choices. And part of learning from those choices is living with the consequences. After I hung up, I felt sick. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because being right felt so foreign. My entire life, I'd been the one who smoothed things over, who made sacrifices to keep peace, who prioritized everyone else's comfort over my own standards. Setting boundaries felt like learning to speak a new language. That evening, I was in my apartment working on a website redesign for a local restaurant when I heard footsteps on the stairs outside my door. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that paused right outside my apartment. A knock. Not the quick, light knock of a delivery person or the familiar pattern of Eli's arrival. This was slow, hesitant. I opened the door to find Chloe standing in the hallway, holding a bottle of wine and looking sheepish. Hey, she said. Can I come in? I stepped aside to let her pass. She set the wine on my counter and looked around my apartment like she was seeing it for the first time. This is really nice, Ivy. I don't think I've ever really looked at it before. That was probably true. In the 3 years I'd lived here, Chloe had visited maybe half a dozen times, and never for longer than it took to borrow something or ask for a favor. "What's up?" I asked. I wanted to talk. About everything. She gestured vaguely, encompassing. The mortgage payment, the inheritance, the complicated mess of our family dynamics. We sat on my small couch, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Chloe broke the silence. "I know you think I'm irresponsible. I think you make impulsive decisions without considering the consequences. That's fair." She picked at the label on the wine bottle. "I also know Mom called you about groceries." She did. I didn't ask her to. I mentioned that money was tight, but I didn't ask her to call you. Noted. God, you're being so formal with me, like I'm a client or something. I considered this. Maybe because for the first time in our relationship, we're having a business transaction. You owe me money. I have expectations about your behavior. That changes things. Is that what this is? A business transaction? The question hung between us. Was it, or was it something more complicated? A sister trying to save another sister from herself. A family member finally demanding to be treated with respect. I don't know, I said honestly. I've never done this before. I've never been the person who sets conditions or asks for accountability. I've always just given. And now? Now I'm tired of giving to people who take it for granted. Chloe flinched. That's what you think I do? Take you for granted? When's the last time you asked me how I was doing? Not because you needed something, just because you were curious about my life? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. I don't know. When's the last time you congratulated me on anything? Celebrated something good that happened? To me? Again, silence. Do you even know what I do for work besides the coffee shop? You do design stuff. Freelance. I run a business, Chloe. A successful business that I built from nothing while working full-time and sending money to Grandma every month for 2 years. Last month, I made more from design work than most people make in 3 months at a regular job. Her eyes widened. Seriously? Seriously, but none of you ever asked. You all just assumed I was treading water, getting by, content with my small life. Why didn't you tell us? Because every time I tried to talk about my work, the conversation got redirected to whatever crisis you were having. Because when I mentioned client successes, Mom would say something like, "That's nice, dear," and then ask if I'd heard about Chloe's latest job interview. Chloe was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I never realized. No. And that's part of the problem. What do you want from me, Ivy? How do I fix this? The question was so earnest, so genuinely confused, that my anger softened slightly. Chloe wasn't malicious. She'd just never been asked to think beyond herself. I want you to get a job. A real job that pays enough to cover your expenses. I want you to create a budget and stick to it. I want you to start paying me back in small amounts that won't break you, but that show you're serious about this debt. Okay. And I want you to start seeing me as a whole person instead of just the sister who fixes things. I want you to ask about my life and remember the answers. I want you to celebrate my successes and support me when I'm struggling. Do you struggle? You always seem so together. Everyone struggles, Chloe. I just learned early that struggling publicly meant being ignored or dismissed. So I learned to handle things privately. She nodded slowly. I can try to do better, with all of it. Trying isn't enough anymore. I need to see actual changes. And if I mess up, then you deal with the consequences. I'm not your safety net anymore. That's terrifying. Good. It should be. That's what accountability feels like. After Chloe left that night, I found myself thinking about what Eli had said, that maybe Grandma had orchestrated this somehow, had known that leaving me out of the will would force this reckoning. It seemed far-fetched, but it also seemed like something Grandma might do. She'd always been strategic in her approach to teaching us lessons. Maybe this was just a lesson on a larger scale. I was cleaning up the tea mugs when my phone rang. Eli. "How did it go?" he asked. "How did you know she was here?" "Lucky guess. Plus, you mentioned she'd probably show up once your mom told her about the grocery conversation." It was hard, but good, maybe. She actually listened. That's progress. She also had no idea that I've been successful with my business. None of them do. Are you going to tell them? I don't know. Part of me likes having something that's entirely mine, something they can't minimize or redirect attention from. And the other part? The other part is tired of hiding. Tired of being smaller than I am to make other people comfortable. So, maybe it's time to stop being smaller. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about what it would mean to stop being smaller. To let my family see who I really was, what I'd accomplished, what I was capable of. It felt dangerous. Exposure always felt dangerous when you'd spent your life in the shadows, but maybe dangerous was exactly what I needed. What I didn't know was that within the week, circumstances would force the conversation anyway. And what I'd discover about my family's perception of me would be even more painful than being left out of the will. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just shows you how much deeper the prison goes. The conversation I'd been avoiding happened on a Thursday morning in November, triggered by something I never could have predicted. I was at Brew and Bean, working the early shift, when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Text after text, all from the same number I didn't recognize. Then my email started chiming. Then my Instagram. Ivy Monroe Design? Is this you? We saw your work on the Riverside Restaurant website and were interested in discussing a major project. The messages kept coming. Apparently, Riverside Restaurant had been featured in a regional food magazine, and the article had specifically mentioned their stunning rebrand by local designer Ivy Monroe. Within 2 hours, I had inquiries from 8 different businesses, including a boutique hotel chain that wanted to discuss a complete visual identity overhaul. I was standing behind the espresso machine, trying to process the sudden influx of potential work, when Chloe walked in. "Hey," she said, approaching the counter. "I got a job." "You did?" I looked up from my phone, genuinely surprised. "Where?" "The marketing firm downtown. Administrative assistant, but it's full-time with benefits. I start Monday." "Chloe, that's great." And I meant it. This was exactly the kind of steady, professional job I'd hoped she'd find. The interview went really well. I mentioned that my sister runs a successful design business, and they were impressed. Said it showed I understood the industry. I paused, mid-coffee grind. "You mentioned my business?" "Yeah. I was trying to think of relevant experience, and I remembered what you said about how successful you've been. So I talked about watching you work with clients and learning about branding and marketing from you." "Chloe, I never taught you about branding and marketing." "I know, but they didn't need to know that. Besides, you're my sister. I've absorbed stuff by osmosis, right?" Before I could respond to that questionable logic, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Mom calling. "Ivy, sweetie, I just had the strangest conversation with Mrs. Henderson from down the street. She said she saw an article about you in some magazine? Something about restaurant design?" I stepped away from the counter, lowering my voice. It wasn't about me specifically. They just mentioned my work on a project. "What kind of work?" I thought. "You just did little things on the side. I redesigned their entire brand identity. Logo, website, menu design, signage. It was a 6-month project." Silence. Then, 6 months? How much time are you spending on this hobby of yours? Hobby. The word hit like a slap. It's not a hobby, Mom. It's my business. My career. But you work at the coffee shop. Part-time. I work at the coffee shop part-time to have steady income while I build my design business. The design work is what I do full-time. I had no idea it was so extensive. Another call was coming in. This one from a number I recognized. The boutique. Hotel chain. Mom, I need to go. I'm getting a lot of work calls today. Work calls? At the coffee shop? No, for my design business. I'll call you later. I hung up and answered the hotel call. 20 minutes later, I had a consultation scheduled for the following week that could potentially be worth more money than I'd made in the previous 6 months combined. When my shift ended, I drove straight to Eli's office. His marketing consultancy was housed in a converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting. He'd built something impressive here, something that commanded respect. I wanted that. I wanted to be taken seriously. Emergency meeting number 2 this month, Eli said, looking up from his computer as I walked in. This is becoming a pattern. My family just found out about my business. By accident. How did they react? Mom called it a hobby. Chloe claimed she learned marketing from me through osmosis, despite never showing any interest in what I do. Eli leaned back in his chair. And how do you feel about that? Furious. And also relieved? It's out now. No more pretending I'm just the coffee shop girl who does a little design work on weekends. What are you going to do with that relief? I think I'm going to quit the coffee shop. The words surprised me as much as they surprised Eli. I hadn't planned to say them, but once they were out, they felt absolutely right. You have enough design work to support yourself? After today? Yes, and more coming. I've been playing it safe, keeping the cafe job as insurance. But I think the insurance has been holding me back. How so? Because as long as I have a fallback, I'm not fully committed to making the business succeed. And as long as my family sees me punching a time clock somewhere, they'll never take my real work seriously. That weekend, I made 2 decisions that would change everything. First, I gave my 2 weeks' notice at Brew and Bean. My manager, Sarah, was disappointed but not surprised. I've been waiting for this, she said. You've been checking your phone and taking business calls more and more lately. It's obvious your heart is somewhere else. I'm sorry if I haven't been fully present. Don't apologize. You're outgrowing this place. That's what's supposed to happen. Second, I decided to tell my family the truth about my financial situation. Not because I owed them transparency, but because I was tired of letting them underestimate me. I invited Mom and Chloe over for Sunday dinner, something I'd never done before. Usually, family gatherings happened at Mom's house or at restaurants. Having them in my space, surrounded by the evidence of the life I'd built, felt important. I cooked Grandma's pot roast recipe, using the notes from her recipe box. As I prepared the meal, I found myself thinking about all the times she'd watched me in the kitchen, teaching me techniques and shortcuts she'd learned over decades of feeding family. You have good instincts, she used to say. You know how to make something out of nothing. Maybe that was what I'd been doing all along, making something out of nothing, building a life from scraps of time and self-taught skills. Mom and Chloe arrived together, and I could tell immediately that they'd been talking about me in the car. They had that careful, coordinated look that people get when they've planned a conversation. Your apartment smells amazing, Chloe said, hanging her coat on the hook by the door. It's Grandma's pot roast recipe. From the recipe box, Mom asked, and there was something wistful in her voice. Yes. We sat down to eat, and for a few minutes the conversation was normal. Chloe talked about her new job. Mom updated us on neighborhood gossip. I asked about their weeks. It felt almost like we could be a regular family having a regular dinner. Then Mom brought up the magazine article. "I went and found a copy of that food magazine," she said. "The one that mentioned your work. The restaurant looks beautiful, honey. Very professional." "Thank you. I had no idea you were capable of that level of work." Capable. As if my competence was a surprise to her. "I've been doing this kind of work for 3 years, Mom. It's just that no one ever asked to see it." "Well, we didn't know it was so serious. What would have made it seem serious to you?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "I don't know. An office, maybe? Business cards? A website?" I pulled out my phone and showed her my website, with its portfolio of dozens of completed projects and client testimonials. Then I showed her my business cards, professionally printed, with my logo. Then I gestured around my apartment. "This is my office. I work from here because it allows me to keep overhead low and take on more diverse projects. It just seems so uncertain. Freelancing. What if the work dries up? What if the coffee shop closes? What if any job disappears? At least with my own business, I control my destiny." Chloe had been unusually quiet during this exchange. Now she spoke up. "How much money do you actually make? From the design work?" It was a rude question, but also the question I'd been waiting for. "Last year, after expenses, about $60,000. This year will be closer to 80, and if I land the hotel project I'm pitching next week, next year could hit 6 figures. The silence was complete. Mom set down her fork. Chloe stared at me like I'd just revealed I was secretly a spy. $60,000? Mom repeated. Last year, while working part-time at the cafe and sending Grandma money every month. Why didn't you tell us? Because every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject. Because when I mentioned client meetings or project deadlines, you'd ask if I was sure I could afford to turn down extra shifts at the cafe. Because you made it clear that you saw my design work as a distraction from my real job. Mom looked genuinely shocked. I never meant to dismiss your work. But you did. You all did. Even now, when I told you I was quitting the cafe to focus on design full-time, your first instinct was to worry about uncertainty instead of celebrating my success. I just want you to be secure. I am secure. More secure than I've ever been. I have an emergency fund, a growing client base, and skills that are in high demand. I'm not the person who needs financial help anymore. The weight of that statement settled over the table. For the first time in our family's history, I wasn't the backup plan. I wasn't the one they could count on to set aside my own needs for someone else's crisis. Chloe was the first to speak. Does this mean you won't be able to help me if I need it again? It means I won't automatically say yes just because we're family. It means you'll need to have a really good reason and a plan for paying me back. That seems harsh. It seems fair, which probably feels harsh because fair is new for us. Mom was still processing. I feel terrible that we didn't know, that we didn't support you. You can support me now, by taking my work seriously, by asking about my projects the way you ask about Chloe's job, by celebrating my successes instead of worrying about my risks. Of course, yes, I want to do that. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't quite know how. She hadn't had practice seeing me as someone whose life was worth paying attention to for its own sake, rather than for how it could serve other people's needs. After they left that night, I stood in my kitchen washing dishes and thinking about family photos. All through our childhood, there had been pictures on Mom's mantle and Grandma's refrigerator. Chloe's school plays, her dance recitals, her graduation. My achievements had been there too, but always as background, honor roll certificates tucked, behind more prominent displays, my college graduation photo smaller than Chloe's high school one. I'd never thought about it before, but now I wondered, had I learned to make myself smaller because that's what my family expected? Had I gotten so used to being the supporting character in everyone else's story that I'd forgotten I was the protagonist of my own? The next morning, I woke up to an email that would change everything again. It was from a lawyer I'd never heard of, asking me to call him about a matter concerning your grandmother's estate. Grandma had been dead for 2 months. The will had been read, the inheritance distributed. What could possibly be left to discuss? I called the number, expecting some minor paperwork issue. What I got instead was information that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my family, my grandmother, and the inheritance that had started this whole mess. Some secrets I was about to learn are buried so deep that it takes a lawyer and a safe deposit box key to unearth them. The lawyer's name was David Chen, and his voice on the phone was carefully neutral in the way that legal professionals perfect when they're about to deliver life-changing information. Ms. Monroe, I represent the estate of Sylvia Monroe. I understand the will has already been executed, but there's been a development. Your grandmother left specific instructions that certain items were to remain in my possession until particular conditions were met. What kind of conditions? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Are you available to come to my office this afternoon? The law office was in a restored Victorian house downtown, all dark wood and heavy furniture that smelled like leather and old books. David Chen was younger than his voice had suggested, maybe 40, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Thank you for coming so quickly, he said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the client chairs across from his massive desk. I know this must seem strange, getting a call about your grandmother's estate 2 months after her passing. It does. I thought everything was settled. The will that was read to your family was accurate, but incomplete. Your grandmother was very specific about timing. She wanted the primary will to be executed first, wanted to see how things played out. How things played out? How your family handled the inheritance. How you handled being excluded from it. He opened a thick file folder and pulled out a document I recognized, Grandma's handwriting, but not the will that had been read at the funeral. This is a codicil to the will, dated 3 weeks before your grandmother's death. She came here specifically to add these provisions. He handed me the document, and I recognized Grandma's careful script immediately. If Ivy has requested or accepted financial assistance from family members within 60 days of my death, this codicil is void, and the original will stand as written. If Ivy has demanded or guilt-tripped family members for inheritance money within 60 days of my death, this codicil is void. If Ivy has remained independent and has not asked for anything from my estate while still helping family members in need, according to her own judgment and capabilities, then the provisions below take effect 60 days after my death. My hands were shaking as I read. She was watching. Even after she died, she was watching to see what I would do. She was very specific about the conditions. She wanted to ensure that your response to being excluded was authentic, not influenced by knowledge of additional provisions. And I passed the test? According to my investigation, yes. You didn't ask for money or contest the will. You helped your sister when she was in crisis, but you set conditions and expectations. You maintained your independence while still being available to family. These were exactly the behaviors your grandmother was hoping to see. What kind of investigation? Nothing invasive. Your grandmother knew your character well, but she wanted confirmation. I had someone verify that you hadn't applied for loans or asked family members for financial help, that you had indeed helped with your sister's mortgage payment, that you were building something independent and sustainable. I felt like I was learning about a stranger who happened to share my name. She planned all of this? She planned for multiple scenarios. If you had behaved differently, the original will would have stood. But you behaved exactly as she expected you would. So what happens now? David Chen smiled. And for the first time since I'd arrived, he looked less like a lawyer and more like someone with good news to share. Now I give you this. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small brass key. This opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank. Box 347. Your grandmother has been making deposits there for 15 years. 15 years. Since I was 12 years old. since right around the time my parents' marriage fell apart and Grandma became our primary caretaker. What's in the box? I don't know the complete contents. Your grandmother was very private about her financial arrangements, but I do know there are legal documents, some investments, and a letter addressed specifically to you. The bank was a 10-minute walk from the lawyer's office, but it felt like the longest 10 minutes of my life. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just learned. Grandma hadn't excluded me from her legacy. She'd been testing me, preparing me, waiting to see if I would choose independence and integrity over resentment and entitlement. At the bank, a pleasant woman named Margaret led me to the safe deposit box area. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and Margaret discreetly stepped away to give me privacy. Inside the narrow metal box was a wealth of items I never could have imagined. First, there was an envelope with my name written in Grandma's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated 2 weeks before her death. My dearest Ivy, if you're reading this, it means you've passed a test I never wanted to give you, but one I felt was necessary. It means you chose your own dignity over family approval. It means you helped others without sacrificing yourself. It means you've become the woman I always knew you could be. I never told you this while I was alive, because I wanted you to discover it for yourself. You are the strongest person I've ever known. Not because you don't need help, but because you give help wisely and accept it gracefully. You've spent your whole life being overlooked and underestimated, and instead of becoming bitter, you became better. The inheritance I gave to Chloe was never about need. It was about enabling her to face her own weaknesses. I hoped that having everything would force her to grow up. I hoped that having nothing would force you to recognize your own worth. What you'll find in this box represents 15 years of planning for your future. I've been setting aside money every month since you were 12, investing it, growing it, because I knew that someday you would need not just financial support, but proof that someone believed in you completely. The house was never the real inheritance. The money wasn't either. The real inheritance is knowing that you're capable of building something beautiful from nothing, and that someone saw that capability long before you did. Use this wisely. Use it to grow your business, to take risks, to bet on yourself the way I've been betting on you for 15 years. All my love and all my faith in who you are and who you're becoming. Grandma. I had to stop reading several times because tears were making the words blur. By the time I finished, I was crying openly in the sterile bank vault, not caring who might see. Below the letter were investment statements, stocks, bonds, a savings account that had been growing for 15 years. The total was more than I'd made in my entire adult life combined. Enough to buy a house, to expand my business, to never worry about financial security again. There were also legal documents transferring ownership of various assets to me. Apparently, Grandma had quietly been putting things in my name for years, including, I discovered with shock, a life insurance policy worth more than the house she'd left to Chloe. At the very bottom of the box was a small velvet jewelry case. Inside was Grandma's engagement ring, the one I'd admired as a child but assumed would go to Chloe along with everything else. A note was tucked under the ring. For when you find someone who sees you the way your grandfather saw me, completely and without reservation. I sat in the bank vault for a long time, holding the ring and trying to understand what had just happened to my life. Everything I thought I knew about my place in my family, about Grandma's feelings toward me, about my own worth and future. All of it had been rewritten in the space of 30 minutes. Grandma had seen me. She'd seen me clearly, completely, and she'd been preparing for my success long before I believed it was possible. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been helping my family through their crisis, while they'd been calling me for financial support, I'd been sitting on resources that dwarfed anything they could imagine. I thought about Chloe, struggling with her mortgage payments and her new job. I thought about Mom, worrying about everyone's security while never noticing that the person she worried about least was actually the most secure of all. I thought about the conditions I'd set for helping Chloe, the boundaries I'd drawn, the way I'd insisted on being paid back. All of it done from a place of moral principle rather than financial necessity. When I finally left the bank, it was almost dark. I drove home in a daze, the legal documents and investment statements sitting on my passenger seat like evidence of someone else's life. My phone was buzzing with messages. 3 from Chloe, 2 from Mom, 1 from Eli. I ignored them all until I was safely in my apartment with the door locked and a cup of tea in my hands. The first message was from Chloe. "How was your day? Want to grab dinner this week?" For the first time in our adult relationship, my sister was asking about my life without needing something from me. A few months ago, that would have felt like a major victory. Now it felt like too little, too late, from someone who had no idea who I really was or what I was capable of. The second message was from Mom. "I've been thinking about our conversation Sunday. I want to learn more about your business. Maybe you could show me some of your work?" Again, a gesture that would have meant everything to me before I learned that Grandma had been believing in my success for 15 years, while my immediate family was just beginning to notice I had potential. The message from Eli was simpler. "You've been quiet today. Everything okay?" I called him back. "I need to see you," I said. "Something happened. Something big. Good big or bad big? I don't know yet. Can you come over?" While I waited for Eli, I spread the documents from the safe deposit box across my kitchen table. Investment statements, legal papers, bank account information, tangible proof that I mattered to someone, that my future had been protected and planned for. I thought about the last 2 months, about how betrayed I'd felt by the original will, about how I'd questioned my worth, my place in the family, my grandmother's love for me. I'd been so wrong about everything. When Eli arrived and saw the papers spread across my table, his first question was practical. "Did you win the lottery?" Something like that. My grandmother had a secret plan. Turns out the will my family heard wasn't the whole story. I told him everything. The lawyer's call, the conditions, the safe deposit box, the 15 years of planning. He listened without interrupting, occasionally picking up documents to examine them more closely. "So you're rich," he said when I finished. "I'm secure, more than secure, and your family doesn't know." "Not yet. Are you going to tell them?" That was the question I'd been avoiding. What did I owe my family now that I knew the truth? What did I owe Chloe, who was struggling to pay back a debt that represented a fraction of what was now in my bank account? "I don't know," I said. "Part of me wants to keep it private. Part of me wants to see how long it takes them to see me clearly without external proof of my worth. And part of you wants to watch them realize how wrong they've been about you." Is that terrible? It's human. You've spent your whole life being underestimated. Now you have proof that someone believed in you all along. It makes sense that you'd want the people who didn't believe to understand what they missed. But revenge fantasies rarely feel as good in reality as they do in imagination. I knew he was right. But I also knew that I wasn't ready to let my family off the hook yet. They needed to understand what they'd done, how they'd treated me, what they'd assumed about my life and my worth. The question was, how much did I want them to learn? And how much did I want to control that learning process? What I was about to discover was that some truths have a way of revealing themselves, whether you're ready for the consequences or not. The business contract arrived on a Wednesday morning, exactly 1 week after I'd discovered Grandma's secret inheritance. The boutique hotel chain wanted to hire me for a complete rebrand, 6 properties across 3 states, with potential for expansion to their full portfolio of 24 hotels. The contract value was more money than I'd made in the previous 2 years combined. It was the kind of project that would establish me as a serious player in the industry, the kind of work that would require me to hire employees, rent proper office space, maybe even relocate. It was everything I'd dreamed of when I'd started my little freelance business from my kitchen table. I was staring at the contract, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered, when my phone rang. Mom. Ivy, sweetheart. We have a problem. The familiar weight of family crisis settled on my shoulders, but this time it felt different. This time I had choices. What kind of problem? It's Chloe. She's been let go from her job. What? She just started 2 weeks ago. Apparently there was some confusion about her experience level. She may have oversold her qualifications during the interview. I closed my eyes, remembering Chloe's comment about learning marketing from me by osmosis, and her casual attitude toward embellishing the truth to get what she wanted. What exactly did she tell them? She said she had practical experience in marketing and design from working closely with you. But when they gave her actual work to do, she couldn't do it. She tried, but it was clear she didn't have the skills she'd claimed. They said she was a sweet girl, but not a good fit for the position. 2 weeks. She'd lasted exactly 2 weeks in the first real job she'd had in years, and she'd lost it by lying about qualifications she didn't possess. Where is she now? She's here with me. She's devastated, Ivy. She's talking about how she'll never be able to pay you back now, how she's going to lose the house, how everything is falling apart. I thought about the investment statements sitting in my desk drawer, about the fact that Chloe's mortgage payment represented less than I'd made on a single logo design last month, about how her entire financial crisis could be solved with a fraction of what Grandma had left me. But I also thought about patterns, about enabling, about the difference between helping someone and preventing them from learning. What does she want from me? She's hoping you might be able to help with the mortgage payment again, just until she finds another job. Mom, she lied to get a job and then couldn't do the work. That's not bad luck. That's poor judgment followed by incompetence. Don't be so harsh. She was trying to better herself. She was trying to fake it instead of actually bettering herself. There's a difference. The silence on the other end was familiar. Mom processing the fact that I wasn't automatically saying yes to fixing Chloe's latest crisis. So you won't help? I didn't say that. But if I help, it comes with conditions that are going to be a lot more serious than last time. What kind of conditions? I need to think about it. Tell Chloe I'll call her tonight. After Mom hung up, I sat in my apartment looking at the hotel contract and thinking about timing. Here I was, on the verge of the biggest professional opportunity of my life, and once again my family was asking me to prioritize their crisis over my success. The old Ivy would have set aside the contract, focused on Chloe's problem, made whatever sacrifices were necessary to keep the family stable. The new Ivy, the one who'd been secretly supported by Grandma for 15 years, who'd built a successful business through discipline and talent, who'd learned to value herself, had different priorities. I called Eli. I need to run something past you, I said. Chloe lost her job. Already? Didn't she just start? 2 weeks ago. She lied about her qualifications and couldn't do the work. And let me guess. The family wants you to fix it. Another mortgage payment. Maybe more. Are you going to do it? I'm thinking about it. But I'm also thinking about the fact that I just got offered the biggest contract of my career, and instead of celebrating, I'm dealing with family drama. What does your gut tell you? My gut tells me that if I keep rescuing Chloe from consequences, she'll never learn to make better choices. My heart tells me that she's my sister, and I don't want to watch her lose everything. And your head? My head tells me that I have the resources to help her without it hurting me financially, but that having the resources doesn't mean I should use them. So what are you going to do? I think I'm going to give her a choice. A real choice, with real consequences. That evening, I drove to Mom's house for the first time in months. Chloe was on the couch in pajamas, surrounded by tissues and looking like she'd been crying for hours. Mom was hovering nearby with tea and sympathy. Hey, Chloe said when she saw me, her voice small and defeated. Hey, Mom told me what happened. I screwed up. I know I screwed up. I thought I could figure it out as I went along. Tell me exactly what happened. The story came out between tears and self-recrimination. Chloe had indeed exaggerated her experience during the interview, claiming she'd helped me with client projects and learned practical skills. When her supervisor had asked her to create a simple marketing plan, she'd panicked and produced something that was clearly the result of desperate Googling rather than actual knowledge. I tried, she said. I stayed up all night trying to figure out how to do what they wanted. But I didn't even understand half the terminology. Did you ask for help? Did you tell them you needed training? I was afraid they'd realize I'd lied about my experience. So instead you turned in work that made it obvious you'd lied about your experience. I know it was stupid. I know I should have been honest from the beginning. I sat down across from her, studying my sister's face. She looked genuinely remorseful. But she'd looked remorseful after the cryptocurrency disaster too. The question was whether she was sorry for the consequences or sorry for the choices that led to them. Chloe, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay, if I help you with the mortgage payment again, what's your plan for making sure this doesn't happen a third time? I'll get another job, a better job. I'll be more careful about what I say in interviews. That's not a plan. That's just hoping. Things will be different without changing anything about your approach. What do you mean? I mean, what skills are you going to develop? What training are you going to get? What are you going to do differently to ensure you can actually perform the work you're claiming you can do? Chloe looked confused, like the question didn't make sense. I'll figure it out. How? I don't know. The same way everyone else figures it out. Everyone else learns skills before they claim to have them. Everyone else gets training or education or practice before they apply for jobs that require expertise. I can't afford to go back to school. There are other ways to learn. Online courses, certification programs, volunteer work to build actual experience. But all of those require time and effort, and admitting that you don't already know everything. Mom jumped in. Ivy, she's trying. Can't you see how upset she is? Being upset about consequences isn't the same as being committed to change. I turned back to Chloe. Here's what I'm willing to do. I'll pay your mortgage for the next 3 months. Not one payment, 3 months, which gives you time to find work without panic. But during those 3 months, you're going to do something to actually build marketable skills. Like what? That's up to you to figure out. Take a certification course in something practical. Project management, social media marketing, bookkeeping. Volunteer for a nonprofit to get real experience. Shadow someone in a field you're interested in. But you're going to spend those 3 months becoming someone who can actually do the work you claim you can do. And if I don't, then you lose the house and I don't help you again. Ever. The silence in the room was heavy. Mom looked shocked by my ultimatum. Chloe looked scared. That seems harsh, Mom said. What seems harsh is watching someone make the same mistakes over and over and never learning from them. What seems harsh is enabling someone to avoid growing up indefinitely. She's trying to grow up. No, she's trying to get the benefits of being grown up without doing the work. There's a difference. I looked at Chloe directly. I love you, but I'm not going to keep rescuing you from yourself. Either you want to change, or you don't. Either you're willing to do the work to become someone capable of handling adult responsibilities, or you're not. But I'm not going to pretend that good intentions are enough anymore. What if I can't do it? Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Then you'll fail. And failing will teach you something that success hasn't. That's cold. It's honest, and honestly is what our family has been missing. I stood up to leave, but Chloe's voice stopped me. Wait, I'll do it. The skills thing. I'll figure out what to learn, and I'll learn it. You're sure? I'm sure. I don't want to lose the house. And I don't want to be the person who can't do anything right. Okay. I'll transfer money for 3 mortgage payments tomorrow. But Chloe, this is the last time. After this, you're on your own. As I drove home, I thought about the conversation I just had. For the first time in our relationship, I'd set clear expectations and clear consequences. I'd offered help without enabling dependence. I'd treated Chloe like an adult capable of change rather than a child who needed protection from her own choices. It felt strange and uncomfortable and absolutely right. When I got home, I found an email from the hotel chain asking about my timeline for the rebrand project. They wanted to move quickly, start with a pilot property, see how the collaboration worked before committing to the full contract. I wrote back accepting their offer and proposing a timeline that would allow me to focus completely on their project. For the first time in years, I was prioritizing my professional success over my family's drama. It felt like the kind of choice Grandma had been preparing me to make. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly word would spread about my new contract, or how dramatically it would change the way my family saw me. Sometimes success is the loudest truth you can tell, and sometimes the people who love you aren't ready to hear it. The confrontation I'd been avoiding happened 3 weeks later, triggered by something I never saw coming. Chloe actually following through on her commitment. She'd enrolled in an online digital marketing certification program and was halfway through a social media management course. She'd also started volunteering for the local animal shelter, managing their Instagram account and creating flyers for adoption events. For the first time in years, she seemed focused, purposeful, even excited about learning new skills. I was proud of her. Genuinely, surprisingly proud, which made what happened next even more painful. I was in my apartment on a Saturday morning, working on the hotel rebrand project, when my phone rang. It was Chloe, but she sounded different, excited, almost breathless. Ivy, you're not going to believe this. I just got off the phone with someone from Meridian Marketing. They want to interview me for a junior account coordinator position. That's great, Chloe. How did they hear about you? That's the crazy part. They said they saw my work with the animal shelter on social media and were impressed. They looked up my LinkedIn profile and saw that I'm related to you. My stomach dropped. Related to me? Yeah, they know about your design business. Apparently, word is getting around about that big hotel contract you landed. They asked if you'd taught me everything I know about marketing. What did you tell them? I told them the truth. That you inspired me to get serious about learning, but that I'm developing my own skills through coursework and practical experience. Good. That's honest. But here's the thing. They want to meet with both of us. They're thinking about expanding their creative services, and they want to discuss whether there might be opportunities for collaboration between their marketing work and your design work. I was quiet for so long that Chloe asked if I was still there. I'm here. I'm just processing. Is this bad? Did I mess something up? No, you didn't mess anything up. It's just complicated. What was complicated was that Meridian Marketing was one of the most respected firms in the region. A collaboration with them could take my business to the next level, open doors I'd never even considered. What was also complicated was that this opportunity was coming through Chloe, which would inevitably create family dynamics I wasn't sure I was ready to handle. When do they want to meet? Monday afternoon. Are you interested? I thought about saying no. I thought about protecting the clear boundaries I'd established between my professional life and my family obligations. I thought about the risks of mixing business with family drama. Then I thought about Grandma's letter, about how she'd wanted me to bet on myself, to take risks, to build something beautiful. Yes, I said. I'm interested. The meeting at Meridian Marketing went better than I could have imagined. The firm's partners were smart, professional, and genuinely excited about the possibility of combining their strategic marketing expertise with my creative capabilities. They offered to refer clients to me for design work, and I could refer clients to them for marketing strategy. More importantly, they were impressed with Chloe. Not because of her connection to me, but because of the work she'd done with the animal shelter and her thoughtful answers to their questions about social media trends and audience engagement. "She's green," the senior partner told me privately, "but she has good instincts and she's willing to learn. That combination is rare." They offered Chloe the junior position on the spot. Walking out of that meeting, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Professional collaboration with my sister. Not rescuing her, not enabling her, but actually working alongside her in our respective areas of expertise. "I can't believe this is happening," Chloe said, as we stood on the sidewalk outside the Meridian office. 6 months ago, I'd lost everything. Now I have a real job with a company I actually respect, and you have a new business partnership. You earned this. Chloe, the coursework, the volunteer experience, the way you handled the interview, that was all you. But it started because you refused to keep rescuing me. If you'd just given me money without conditions, I never would have been forced to actually develop skills. It was the first time she'd acknowledged the value of the boundaries I'd set, the first time she'd recognized that tough love had been love. "Does this mean you forgive me?" she asked. "For the inheritance thing, for being selfish, for not seeing how successful you were?" I considered the question. Forgiveness felt too simple for what had happened between us. What I felt was more complex. Understanding, maybe, or acceptance, that we'd both been playing roles that no longer served us. "I think we're different people than we were 6 months ago," I said. "Maybe forgiveness is less important than just moving forward as who we are now." That evening, I called a family meeting. Not because there was a crisis to manage, but because I had something to tell them, something I'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. Mom and Chloe arrived at my apartment together, and I could tell they'd been speculating about why I'd called them over. "Is everything okay?" Mom asked. "You sounded so serious on the phone." "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. But I need to tell you both something important. I'd been rehearsing this conversation in my head for days, trying to find the right way to explain about Grandma's secret inheritance without making it sound like a betrayal or a test they'd failed. A few weeks ago, I got a call from Grandma's lawyer, I began. It turns out the will that was read at the funeral wasn't the complete picture. I told them everything. The codicil, the conditions, the safe deposit box, the 15 years of planning. I showed them Grandma's letter, the investment statements, the engagement ring. The silence when I finished was complete. Mom was the first to speak. 15 years? Since I was 12. She was planning this since you were 12 years old? Apparently, Chloe was staring at the investment statements. This is more money than the house was worth, significantly more. So you've been, what, testing us? Watching to see how we'd treat you? No. I didn't know about any of this until 3 weeks ago. Everything I did. Helping you with the mortgage, setting conditions, making you take responsibility. I did all of that thinking I was just a broke coffee shop worker who was tired of being taken for granted. Mom picked up Grandma's letter and read it again. She says here that she hoped giving Chloe everything would force her to grow up. And it did. Eventually. And she hoped that giving you nothing would force you to recognize your own worth. That part worked too. Chloe was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. Do you hate us? For how we treated you? I don't hate you. But I understand now why I felt so invisible for so long. It wasn't just in my head. We really didn't see you, Mom said, and her voice was full of regret. We took you for granted because you were so capable, so independent. We thought you didn't need attention the way Chloe did. Everyone needs attention. Everyone needs to be seen and valued for who they are, not just for what they can do for other people. You're right. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Ivy. I'm sorry. Too, Chloe said. I'm sorry I never asked about your life, never celebrated your successes, never treated you like someone whose dreams mattered. Thank you for saying that. What happens now? Mom asked. With all of this? She gestured toward the financial documents spread across my table. Now I use it the way Grandma intended. To build something bigger, to take risks, to bet on myself. And with us. With our family? I thought about that question. What did happen now? We couldn't go back to the old dynamics, but we could choose to build new ones. Now we practice being a family where everyone's worth is recognized, where help comes, with respect, not just need, where we celebrate each other's successes instead of just managing each other's crises. Can you teach us how to do that? Chloe asked. We'll have to figure it out together. Later that night, after they'd gone home, I sat in my apartment holding Grandma's engagement ring and thinking about legacy. Not the money or the investments, but the deeper inheritance she'd left me. The knowledge that I was worth investing in, worth believing in, worth 15 years of careful planning and faith. I thought about the hotel contract, about the partnership with Meridian Marketing, about Chloe's new job and genuine growth. I thought about boundaries and forgiveness and the difference between helping someone and enabling them. Most of all, I thought about the final line of Grandma's letter. All my love and all my faith in who you are and who you're becoming. The first time in my life, I understood that I was both. Who I was, which was enough, and who I was becoming, which was unlimited. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Eli. How did it go? He asked. Better than I expected. Harder than I hoped. Are you okay? I'm free, I said, and realized as I said it that it was true. For the first time in my life, I'm completely free to be myself. And who is that exactly? Someone who was seen all along, even when she couldn't see herself. The story could have ended there, with understanding and forgiveness and the promise of better relationships. But the real test of change isn't in the moment of revelation. It's in what you do with the ordinary days that follow. That's where the real transformation happens. That's where you discover whether you've actually changed or just had a temporary moment of clarity. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of my new house, the first house I'd ever owned, preparing Thanksgiving. Dinner from Grandma's recipe box. The kitchen was twice the size of my old apartment, with windows that looked out over a garden I was still learning how to tend. The house wasn't grand or expensive, but it was mine in a way that felt revolutionary. Every room reflected choices I'd made for myself, not compromises to accommodate other people's needs or expectations. Chloe arrived first, carrying a homemade pie and wearing the kind of confident smile I'd never seen on her before. She'd been promoted at Meridian Marketing 3 months earlier, and the success looked good on her. The kitchen smells exactly like Grandma's house, she said, setting the pie on the counter. That's the goal. Can I help with anything? You can. Set the table. Mom should be here soon. As Chloe arranged plates and silverware, I watched her move through my space with careful respect. She asked before moving things, complimented choices I'd made in decorating, treated my home like it mattered. Small gestures, but ones that would have been unthinkable a year ago. I have news, she said as she folded napkins. Ryan contacted me last week. I paused in my stirring of gravy. Ryan? What did he want? Apparently he's in some kind of legal trouble. The cryptocurrency scheme he ran wasn't just a scam. It was actually illegal. He's being prosecuted for fraud, and he wanted to know if I'd be willing to testify on his behalf. Character witness kind of thing. What did you tell him? I told him that anyone who knew his character wouldn't be willing to testify on his behalf. I smiled. The old Chloe would have agonized over the decision, would have felt guilty for not helping someone who'd hurt her. This Chloe understood that compassion didn't require self-sacrifice. How do you feel about it? Relieved, mostly. A year ago, I might have said yes because I felt sorry for him. Now I realize that feeling sorry for someone isn't the same as owing them something. Mom arrived as I was pulling the turkey from the oven, carrying flowers from her garden and wearing a dress I'd never seen before. "You look nice," I said, accepting her hug. I've been trying to pay more attention to things like that, to taking care of myself instead of just managing everyone else's lives. It was a small change, but significant. For as long as I could remember, Mom had dressed for practicality and convenience, always ready to rush off to handle someone else's emergency. The fact that she'd taken time to choose something she felt good in suggested a shift in how she saw her own worth. We sat down to eat as the late afternoon sun slanted through the dining room windows. The conversation was different from our family. Dinners of the past, slower, more thoughtful, with space for everyone to contribute. Mom asked about my work, and actually listened to the details when I talked about the hotel chain expansion and the new clients I'd taken on. Chloe shared stories from her job that weren't just about drama or problems, but about projects she was proud of and skills she was developing. When Mom mentioned a friend's daughter who was struggling to find direction after college, her first instinct wasn't to suggest that our family should somehow fix the situation, but to ask if there were resources or advice that might be helpful. "It's hard to watch someone you care about make poor choices," she said. "But I'm learning that trying to control other people's decisions usually just makes things worse for everyone." "That's a hard lesson," I said. "I'm still learning it, but watching how well things turned out when I finally stopped trying to manage your relationship with Chloe has been convincing." After dinner, we moved to the living room with coffee and Chloe's pie. The conversation turned to memories, stories about Grandma, about our childhood, about moments we'd shared and understood differently. "I found something last week that I thought you should see," Mom said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "I was cleaning out some old boxes, and I found this tucked inside one of my photo albums." She handed me a letter in Grandma's handwriting, addressed to Mom, and dated just a month before Grandma's death. "Gloria, I know you're going to be upset about my decision regarding the inheritance, but I need you to understand something important. Ivy doesn't need money. She needs to be seen. You've spent so many years focused on Chloe's struggles that you've forgotten to notice Ivy's strengths. She's built something beautiful and substantial while you weren't paying attention, and she's done it without asking for help or recognition. The money I'm leaving her isn't about fairness or favoritism. It's about showing her that someone was watching, someone was proud, someone believed in her potential even when she couldn't see it herself. Your job now isn't to feel guilty about the past, but to do better in the future. See both your daughters clearly. Celebrate their successes. Support their dreams. Love them for who they are, not just for what they need from you. All my love. Mother." I read the letter twice, feeling that familiar mix of gratitude and grief that came with Grandma's continuing wisdom. "She knew," I said. "She knew exactly what was happening in our family, and she planned for it." "She was always the smartest person in any room," Mom said. "I just wish it hadn't taken me so long to understand what she was trying to teach us." "We understand it now," Chloe said. "That has to count for something." As evening approached and it was time for them to leave, I stood on my front porch watching Mom and Chloe walk to their cars. They moved differently now, with less urgency, less drama, more attention to the moment they were in. Chloe turned back before getting in her car. "Same time next month for Christmas?" "Same time next month." After they drove away, I went back, inside, and cleaned up the dinner dishes, thinking about the strangeness of ordinary happiness. For so much of my life, family gatherings had been opportunities for crisis management or careful navigation of unspoken tensions. Tonight had been different. Tonight had been what I'd always imagined family dinners could be. People who cared about each other, sharing food and stories and attention. My phone buzzed with a text from Eli. "How was dinner with the family?" "Good," I texted back. "Really good." "Want to talk about it?" "Tomorrow. Tonight I just want to sit with how good it was." I made myself a cup of tea and settled into the armchair by the window, holding Grandma's engagement ring and watching the last light fade from the sky. In 6 months, Eli and I would be engaged, though I didn't know that yet. In a year, I'd be expanding my business to include 2 full-time employees. In 2 years, Chloe would be managing her own accounts at Meridian and considering starting her own consultancy. But that night, I didn't need to know what was coming. It was enough to sit in my own house, in my own life, knowing that I was seen, valued, and loved. Not for what I could do for other people, but for who I was when I was completely myself. The real inheritance, I realized, had never been the money, or the house, or the jewelry. It had been the knowledge that someone believed in me completely, and the permission that belief gave me to finally believe in myself. Some stories end with dramatic gestures or grand revelations. This one ended with something quieter, but more lasting. The recognition that I had always been enough, even when I couldn't see it, especially when I couldn't see it. In the kitchen, Grandma's recipe box sat on the counter where I'd left it after, preparing dinner. Tomorrow, I'd use her cornbread recipe to make something for the neighbors. Next week, I'd try her apple cake for the first time. But tonight, it was enough to know that every recipe came with the same invisible ingredient, the knowledge that I was loved, I was seen, and I was worth the careful attention that love requires. The inheritance had always been mine. I just needed to grow into someone who could receive it.